Good evening. Welcome. Happy Friday. You made it. Only a few political things happened this week. My name is Stephen Davey. I'm the senior producer here at WBUR CitySpace. Thank you all for coming. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes. First, if you could silence your phones. This is a live podcast taping, after all. And for your awareness, the emergency exits are located in that corner and where you came in. Okay, so who is ready for an October surprise this year? No? Yeah, okay. Just get the election over as fast as possible. Okay, since this is a news organization, though, I just wanted to point out our team upstairs on the election desks working tirelessly, reporting on all the political news that you can need and want to understand just what's at stake nationally and locally here at Boston and Greater Boston. Get the latest from WBUR on air and on our website, wbur.org/elections for all the coverage. All right. You ready for all the twists and turns of October surprises? Please welcome this day in esoteric political history.
All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
This is fun. We have very rarely been in person together, and it's so the three of us have very rarely been in person, and then the five of us who kind of make the show, including people you'll meet later, but Brittany and Jacob over there, we've never been in the same room together. So even at that basic level, thank you for giving us the opportunity to meet each other. But more importantly, this is really great. And it's wonderful to meet all of you. So hello, Boston, and thanks for having us. My name is Jody Avirgan.
I'm Kellie Carter Jackson.
And I'm Nicole Hemmer.
Hey there.
And yeah, we host this show for Radiotopia. A lot of Radiotopia folks are in the house tonight as well. So we're really excited to do this. And I'll give you a little roadmap of this evening. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the Boston-related episodes that we've done on the show and have a little fun with that. And then we are going to do a proper taping of some episodes. So we'll record some episodes and we'll do like what we usually do during taping. We'll do the intro. We'll do all that stuff. We'll do pickups when we screw up. But we'll do an episode on October surprises, which will then run in the feed in a few weeks when it's October. And then at the end, we'll do a little Q&A. We'll have a chance to answer some of your questions, talk a little bit about how we make the show. If you have questions about what we talk about tonight, if you have questions about the current election, do you have thoughts about the current election? Any lingering debate thoughts floating around?
No thoughts, no comment.
No comment. Yeah, well, maybe we'll get into this later. But I mean, I certainly, hosting a history show has really, and this was kind of one of the reasons I was interested in starting a show like this. It really has offered a really kind of great lens with which to process the current history-making election. So we can get into that a little later. And then afterwards, we're going to hang out a little bit out there, and we have treats for all of you because today is Nikki's birthday. So
I told him I would work on my birthday, but there had to be food.
There had to be food. So there will be food for all of us out there, and we'll hang out and we'll have merch and all that stuff. But look, before we get to the main topic of conversation, October surprises, I thought we could talk a little bit about something Boston related. So we are in one of the greatest cities in the country, located between Providence and Portland, Maine. And it is worth honoring the weird history of, look, I'm from New York. One of the things that I find I feel closest to New York when I'm talking shit about Boston. And so I'm trying not, and I do really have a level of disdain for this city. I apologize. But so I will try not to do too much of that this evening.
Haters, we got haters.
I know. But I was texting with someone today who said, like, your show and basically weird history would not exist if this city did not exist. And it is true. Like, this is, and as we will see in a second, this is the home of it all. Do you have before we get to the actual topics that we've done on the show, do you have like a favorite? Because Kellie's from here or lives here.
Yeah, I claim it now. I do. I'm not a native. But
do you have a favorite little weird monument or piece of history? Or
my favorite monument has to be the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. That's right across from the State House. I take students there on field trips, and it's just, It's an absolute beautiful display of like Black manhood and soldierhood. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. You have some students here tonight, by the way.
I do. Where are my students? Hey!
That's
What's
great.
good, Wellesley? What's good?
All right, so here to talk about some weird Boston history and to join us for the rest of the evening is our special guest for tonight, Boston's favorite son, the great Josh Gondelman. Get up here, Josh. Hello, Josh, wearing that hat.
I know how to pander.
Yes. So Josh is a great comedian. You hear him on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me every once in a while, and has a book, Nice Try, and was a writer for Desus and Mero and John Oliver, all sorts of wonderful things.
Yeah.
And has been a guest on this show before talking about the Salem witch trials.
I would say America's greatest witch trials.
Honestly, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
So look, here's what we're going to do. We have done, Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob, our researchers over there, but something like 600 plus episodes of this show in the 4-ish years that we've been doing it. And I think this is an appropriate number. About 11 or 12 have been Boston related. That's a decent number if you know. So what we're going to do, oh no, I went the wrong direction. Oh no, don't look, close your eyes. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the stories that we've done that are Boston related that we've done over the years. So here they are. Very quickly, holler if you have thoughts about any of these as you take a look. But we did recently an episode about how Thoreau spent one night in jail and then talked about it for the next 15 years.
The rest of his life.
No.
He's just, yeah.
Street cred. He had
Didn't
street
want to pay his
cred.
taxes, which, by the way, is one of the big themes I've learned about American history, is that most things were decided because someone didn't want to pay their taxes.
Facts. That's
Including
facts.
Thoreau. I saw the Garrison statue today, actually, on my
Oh,
walk.
really?
So he burned the Constitution.
Yeah. Sure did.
Evacuation
Which
day.
is tough because then you lose your First Amendment rights. So like, we gotcha.
Evacuation day. Is this something that everyone in Boston, it's a holiday
Still
here?
celebrate?
Yeah. So, what's
Yeah.
that?
It's our excuse to celebrate St. Patrick's.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, we close all the schools and everything ostensibly to celebrate the anniversary of the British getting kicked out of Boston Harbor, but in reality, it's because it's St.
St. Patrick's Day. I like that. I like that.
That woman.
You're giving away all our secrets. The Stars and Stripes of Sports. That was an episode actually about the first time that the national anthem was sung at a sporting event, and that was at a Red Sox game in 1918, and has kind of always been tied to war, basically. We did an episode on the Big Dig, tied to that fantastic series by Ian Koss that we
Yeah.
did with WGBH. Is that right?
That's
so-
100% my favorite title for an episode.
Big Dig Energy. That was
Big
good.
dig energy.
Hats off, Jacob.
Josh, how much is the Big Dig a defining feature of being from? Or
I didn't know. Like, I thought that until I was like 20, I thought the Big Dig was just like what traffic was called. I was just, it's the Big Dig. And like, no, you're just going to school. It's like, I don't know. It was, and now it's done, I guess. And it is, if you weren't here before, it is better now, which is almost unbelievable.
yeah, they kind of pulled it off.
Yeah, they did it.
That's what they're telling themselves after billions of dollars of
Oh,
cost
sure, because
overrun.
in New York, there's no traffic.
Yeah, really.
No, there's one exit off of like the in New York near Randall's Island that has been in construction
Oh, yeah.
my entire memory. Yeah. All right, Our Bodies Ourselves. What was that episode? Help me remember. This is another feature on the show, so
That
we just
was-
forget that
Is that
episode.
about a speech?
It was written by a women's collective here in
Here in
Boston,
Boston.
who were putting down medical information about women since doctors didn't want to study women. So the women's were like, well, we know about our parts and we could tell you things.
Great. Yeah,
Sorry,
that's
yeah.
right. And then the Roxbury murders in 1979. We did an episode on that.
Yeah, the Combahee River Collective, yeah.
Yep. Right. And it was mostly the collective that kind of banded up around that. And then we did an episode about the death of Len Bias, and then moreover
yeah.
how that led to or tied into a panic over cocaine and especially crack, and actually led to the sort of big omnibus drug bill that Tip O'Neill was a big part of. So there's like a real Boston sort of lineage there. Mandela's visit to Boston in 1990, soon after being given memories of that one.
Yeah,
memories
I
of
do.
that story.
But yeah.
Yeah. And then the molasses flood, which is, I think, the
Iconic.
iconic weird history moment. Was that taught in schools, Josh?
The molasses flood?
Yeah.
Moment of silence every day.
Did you pour one out very slowly for all of the victims?
Pour out a glass of molasses.
Yeah, little drip. And it's like, this is
Watch
for all
it
those slow
slowly
fucks who
pour.
got caught by the molasses. Those stupid bastards. It's my
In
kindergarten
fact,
teacher.
one of the things we learned in that episode was that the molasses moved pretty fast,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
And then it was a lot of the injuries were from the fires that that were in the wake of that. But yes. Okay, so what
It
we're
must
going
be
to...
so sad to die in a way that history remembers is so hilarious.
Yes. All right, so what we'll try and do here is maybe can the three of you up here narrow it down to the three most Boston episodes of these, and then maybe we'll vote with the audience and try and find the most Boston story.
Oh. I mean, I have my three. Do you want?
No, well, each of you gets to nominate one.
Oh, me.
Well, I don't know.
It's hard. That's hard.
Democracy is hard. Just talk it out.
I mean, I feel like we have to put big dick energy on there, y'all.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
have to.
Okay.
100%. I'm then going to steal the one that Kelly was going to say, which is the molasses flood.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick Evacuation Day because, in part, St. Patrick's Day coincides with my other favorite weird Boston history, which is the Gardner Museum heist, which took place on St. Patrick's Day. That's right. Everybody, a murmur of dissent in the crowd.
There was a really good podcast series about that.
Yeah, it was a
too, I think.
BUR thing, I think.
There you go.
Called Last
Nice
Scene.
work,
It's the-
WBUR.
It's one of
Last
my
Scene,
favorite
that's right.
podcasts.
Oh, that was
Oh,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, it rules.
Your
all
second favorite, right?
Yeah, I said one of my favorite podcasts.
You're allowed to listen to other podcasts. All right, so those are our three nominees, unless someone out there wants to really make the case for one of the others. Okay, good. Okay, Molasses Flood, Evacuation Day, and The Big Dig. So what we'll do is we'll just do a, I don't know, voice vote?
Volume
or
poll. Yeah.
Yeah.
Clap
Clap
vote?
sure.
Okay, so. You get one vote.
Keep that in mind. It's a
isn't-
rehearsal.
This isn't Michigan in 2020. You only get one vote.
Slander Dominion's voting machines.
All right. The Molasses Flood. The Big Dig. And Evacuation Day. Okay. So I think the Big Dig wins.
I feel like
Are we okay with that?
I feel like, yeah.
Yeah,
It certainly was like lived history for many generations. So I think that.
it really was.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go. Okay. The being nice about Boston portion of the evening has concluded. Let's move on. All right. So
There's part of me that just wants to be like, how about Jason Tatum scoring 50 in Game 7 against Philadelphia right in Joel Embiid's friggin' eye, kid.
as a Sixers fan, I do not want to include that one. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to record some episodes here. And I'm going to pull out this, which is my prep. But this is going to be a proper taping. So you'll hear what we do on the show, except for we don't usually do it on stage in front of people. We do it on Zoom. But, I'll say to Josh what I say to all of our guests, which is this is not live. If you want to take something over or we can sort of stop and strategize, we'll do that. And then obviously we'll edit this after the fact and clean everyone up and make us sound much smarter than we actually are. But we're going to tape this and then you'll kind of see how the show comes together, including I'll do my intro. So, we ready?
Let's go.
Usually I ask, are you rolling? Because we all record individually.
I'm
You're
rolling.
You're rolling?
Rolling.
I'm on ecstasy.
Right. And you pressed record. And that you were also able to set up your microphone while on E is very impressive.
I've mostly been rubbing it against my face.
All right. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. And then I pause, and the music kind of goes, okay. Today, we continue our series of special episodes for this election year. We've been looking at some of the usual rhythms of an election cycle and some of the most interesting and forgotten history around them. So we've talked about conventions, we've talked about debates, we've talked about vice presidential picks, the Veep stakes, and today we're going to talk about October surprises. So we'll try and define exactly what we mean in this episode, but we will then we will go through some of the more interesting examples. But basically, these are stories that upend or reshape an election right up at the last moment of the election cycle. So, welcome to October Surprise Week, and here, as always, are Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And also here, not as always, perhaps those of you listening at home can tell, we have a live audience. We are taping this in Boston at WBUR's CitySpace. Our friends at Radiotopia helped us put this show on, and it is really nice to be gathered together for this. So hello, Boston. Thank you for joining us this evening. And since it is Boston, we knew we had to get a special guest. Joining us here on stage is the one and only Josh Gondelman, Boston native, repeat guest on the show, was a writer for Desus and Mero, Last Week Tonight. His book is called Nice Try, and you hear him a lot on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me these days. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure to be here.
So yeah, this episode is about October surprises, these events that reshape, upend, kind of provide a big twist into an election cycle. And I was thinking about the last couple election cycles, which I felt very upendy and twisty. And so I actually wanted to just start by showing you and the audience here a list of the surprises that I just, off the top of my head, came up with from 2016 to 2024 that feel like October surprises. So, the WikiLeaks, the basket of deplorables comment, the protest in 2020, Trump holds a rally where then Herman Cain gets COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
It's not good.
Rest in peace.
The Trump
RIP.
assassination attempt is from this year, Joe Biden dropping out. These are all feel very October surprisey, except none of them happened in October. And so maybe not to completely undermine the premise of this, but one of the things that I want to explore as we do this is that, everything feels like an October surprise these days.
True.
Have thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it speaks to how up in the air everything is and how quickly everything can change in a way that I was talking to my students the other day about this. It didn't used to be like this.
Yeah.
Like it used to be that elections would happen and sometimes something interesting would happen, but it didn't consume you because there wasn't always like breaking news about the election for months. And I think this year has been kind of the distillation of that. I mean, just the debate, the assassination attempt, Biden dropping out, Harris coming in. Like, it's just been one of the wildest general elections I think we've ever seen. For an election that was supposed to be just a boring old repeat of the 2020 election.
Yeah. The whiplash has been insane because I remember all of us texting during Trump's assassination attempt. And then, was it like a week later where Biden dropped out?
Yeah.
I feel it wasn't a lot of time. And it was like the assassination.
It was like the RNC was like 4 days later, and then 3 days after that.
But a week felt like old news, Like I was like, how have we moved on so quickly? It's been a lot.
Josh, what is your sense? I mean, this is gonna be one of the big through lines today. I mean, frankly, it's one of the big through lines in kind of how I understand the world, but it's like, how much of it is attention and how much of it is the news is actually that crazy?
I mean, the news has been really wild, but I think the thing about an October surprise being in October, right? Like the reason we label it that way is like the same as the logic behind it's always the last place you look.
Yeah.
Right? Like we call it an October surprise because October is the last point where there can kind of be surprises for the most part. Yes. And so that I think that's part of it, right? And so I do think the news has been extra hectic. We've had a fairly, I don't mean to cast any aspersions against our former president, but I do think we've had kind of a chaotic element in the last 3 elections.
Yeah.
Kind of.
And so, we'll get to the history.
Not to impugn his good name,
Right.
he's a little erratic.
The horse in the hospital. But to think that if history, we'll go through the history, but if history teaches us anything, that 3 weeks from now we hit October and there will probably be some surprises.
Yeah, waiting for that.
We've been through this, and there are still shoes. Yeah, how many shoes is this thing wearing?
We're taking off
They
clothes.
keep dropping.
Like,
Yeah.
Whole closet full.
So, okay, let's get into a little bit of the history. And in a second, we'll go through a kind of like taxonomy of how we can categorize October surprises. But there's actually an interesting history that we can kind of trace to the phrase itself. So, Nikki, what's your sense of where that phrase comes from?
Like so much of modern politics, this phrase was gifted to us by Ronald Reagan. So the 1980 election, those of you who remember or who have spent some time studying this period know that the big thing that was hanging over the election was the Iran hostage crisis, which had dragged out at that point for over a year. And it was something that was really helping the Reagan campaign because the Carter administration just looked inept, because they couldn't bring this crisis to a close. And the Reagan campaign was really worried that they were going to bring this crisis to a close right before the election, and that was going to tip the election in Carter's favor. So they start whispering to the press about a possible October surprise. And the reason that they're doing this is because if this happens, if the hostages are freed right before the election, they want journalists to write about it as, oh, this is a political ploy rather than a triumphant diplomatic negotiation by the Carter administration.
So we get the phrase. I mean, I've been trying to get my head around this all day because of knowing what ends up happening, which we will get to, but that the phrase was injected into the discourse as a kind of like counter move. They like invented the phrase to then undermine it or something.
It was like a prophylactic
Yes.
phrase, right? We're like, but he invented the phrase for a thing that hadn't happened.
Yeah.
And didn't happen.
Yeah.
What's that?
And didn't happen.
And didn't happen. Right.
Right.
He invented the phrase for a thing to stop it from happening. It was like magic words.
Yeah.
And so it did put the press on notice, I think, and a big part of this is, as we'll go through, how much of it is the sort of media attention and then voter attention.
And that really is kind of like the slimy part of like electoral politics, right? Where like Ronald Reagan came out and was like, God, it would suck if those American hostages were brought home, right?
Yeah.
Hope that doesn't
Well,
happen.
there is sliminess throughout this evening, and so that's good. They're good that you bring that up because here's how we're gonna do it. We're gonna, as we've often done in the first episode of these series, we've tried to kind of get our head around the basic categories and basically just do like a review, And so we'll rip through a bunch of stories. We can stop, linger on some, but then we'll do some follow-up episodes maybe on the ones that seem a little more interesting. But as we go through, I think we found that you can kind of put October surprises into a few different categories. And so it'll be useful to go through these categories, and each of us is going to take the lead on some of these categories. So the basic categories of October surprises, there's some overlap here and there, but the first one is stuff that candidates say, right? So someone says something late in the election, it causes a stir. There's stuff that the press digs up. A lot of times it's news that pops out at the last minute. There's stuff that happens in the world. A lot of this is foreign events, which can't necessarily be anticipated or controlled, and they will upend an election. And then there's rat fuck. Basically, shenanigans.
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 Shady shit.
That's like
Boston version.
the radio edit of rat fucking from Henry Kissinger's single. So they could play it on Jammin' 94.5.
But, and I will say this last category really just actually, there's an argument to be made that it's all shady shenanigans, and it really kind of weaves throughout. But we will try and roughly break it up into these basic groups as we go through. And then, I think some of the big questions that we'll sort of explore and tease and get around to at the end is how much of these matter? Do they have an actual impact on election returns? And then how much of it is it that it's happening in that sort of compressed window? But I think there's a long history of this stuff going back, we should say, way further than the term existed, right? And so let's start in with stuff that candidates say or gaffes or stuff like that. So, Nikki, where do we want to start?
So one place to start is with candidates saying things or their surrogates saying things that really alienate voters. This is something we now see on, I think, a daily basis in the campaign. It used
Sometimes
to be
intentionally.
Yeah, I know.
used to be a little more rare. The childless cat lady moments were sprinkled out
It didn't
across
used
an
to
election
be a
cycle.
strategy.
Used to be a bad thing.
Yeah.
And of course, when you think about Republican nominees who say something really offensive to drive away voters, of course, we all think of the same person, James Blaine. I know,
The
you're like,
magician.
1884, we're all thinking about that election, where James Blaine is the Republican candidate, and he goes to one of these Republican meetings, and there is a preacher there who is talking about what's wrong with the Democratic Party. And what's wrong with the Democratic Party, he says, is that it is the party of rum, Romanism, and rebellion. Great alliteration, not necessarily as scrutable to a modern audience as it was then, but the idea was that the Democratic Party is basically made up of people who oppose prohibition, Catholics, and supporters of the Confederacy. And in saying this, Blaine is out.
Josh is like, no.
Yeah. Some of that sounds pretty sick. And then you get to the Confederacy, and it's like,
You weren't wrong. It wasn't an inaccurate description, but that for the first 2/3 of it was really aimed at new immigrants and at Catholics. And so that turned off a lot of Democratic voters. It angered a lot of Democratic voters. And what you see is a real outcry against Blaine. Now, Blaine wasn't the one who made the comments.
Right.
There's a little bit of a Reverend Wright thing about this. Like a preacher said
Oh,
something,
interesting.
and everybody starts
You
yelling
just
at the
sat
candidate.
there and nodded along.
That's right.
Bad
You're
enough.
just like,
Right.
I was just in
Complicit.
the pews. What do you want from me? But he also doesn't denounce him. And so this becomes, in the last weeks of the campaign, you have particularly Irish immigrants in New York who are kind of on both the rum and Romanism side of things, really angry and organizing against Blaine. And the result of all of this is, in a very, very close election, Grover Cleveland, the Democratic candidate, wins by 0.5%. And so I know we'll talk later about whether or not October surprises matter, but in a very close election like that, everything matters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so this comment may have been what put the only Democratic president into office between the Civil War and 1912.
Wow. Turnout that year, by the way, was 78% election turnout.
what else were they doing?
78%.
Yeah, I know.
It's wild.
What is it these days?
Oh, it's not
Upper
good.
what? Oh, it's below. It's under 50.
Yeah.
Boy, all right.
I know.
Well,
That's such a tough. Back in the day, it feels like an October surprise was trickier because, how do you even let people know?
Right.
Oh, he said this thing about rum and Romanism. How long is that game of telephone?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that. The press, how long does it take to circulate by wagon?
Yeah, right.
What happened?
but the flip side, I think about this too. But the flip side to that is that what else are people going to do but sit around and talk about that?
That's right.
All day.
Also
and
the
read
Telegraph.
incredibly long newspaper
Oh,
articles.
the Telegraph. Okay,
The
yeah.
Telegraph.
Telegraph.
It's like
And it's
Twitter.
an era of party papers. And so people subscribe to the newspaper of their parties. So you bet the, Charlotte Democrat was sending around this in every paper from the moment they got it till the election.
And that's such a sick quote that the alliteration hits even as boop, 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 boop. And 3 hours. I get it.
All right. Our next thing a candidate said or didn't say.
So the next thing, the question of an October surprise, that is the gun that didn't go off. So the thing that the candidate doesn't say in the run-up to the election, you kind of get the surprise later. And in the case of the 1916 election, the surprise comes about 6 months later because Woodrow Wilson runs as the president who kept us out of war. And that was a really great line to run on because Americans really wanted to stay out of the war that was unfolding in Europe at the time. And Wilson really wanted to win re-election because he's now the second Democrat to win office since the Civil War. He won in a crazy race in 1912 where the Republicans were divided, and he snuck his way into the White House. And so he wants to hold on to the White House. And so he's not going to say, well, we're probably going to go to war with Europe in a few months. So the October surprise is the president kept us out of war. The April surprise is mass mobilization and more war.
Jacob, who helps do the preps and research for this, his bullet points under this were basically like, Wilson says he's going to keep us out of war. Wilson wins the election very closely. Next April, we declare war. But the U.S. does declare war on Germany, April 1917. There was also this other subplot in this election where Hughes, the person that Wilson was running against, but all of you knew that, was in California and snubbed the governor of California, and people were very offended by that. And California, I guess, was the really critical state in the 1916 election, both on the anti-war question and apparently on this "you snubbed our governor" question. And it ended up being the decisive state.
And there is a corollary where somebody actually does say something in the run-up to the election, and that's in 1972. Again, in this case, the U.S. was involved in a war that was very unpopular, and in this race against Richard Nixon and George McGovern, Henry Kissinger comes out and says, peace is at hand, right? Victory is right around the corner. And by 1972, not everyone believes.
No,
those of you who were around in fall of '72, did it feel like peace was at hand?
Henry Kissinger tells you something about war, you listen. He's a straight shooter.
Man knows his way around a war.
Man. 2.5 years later.
Yeah, exactly. Remarkable. Do are there people here who remember Kissinger saying that in '72? Yeah. My parents are here, by the way. They remember that. We will get into other Vietnam War shenanigans later, for sure. So will Kissinger.
Rat fucking is a better word.
Kissinger. You want to talk about the 2008?
I do want to talk about 2008, which is maybe actually 2012. Which
2012,
is
of course.
when Barack Obama was running against Mitt Romney. And they had already set up that campaign to be about populist economics. The first campaign speech that Barack Obama gave in Osawatomie, Kansas, was about making a fairer economy. And the good Lord could not have delivered him a better person to run against than a venture capitalist and the guy who had detailed plans to cut Social Security and Medicare. But so he's running against Mitt Romney and
Former
Paul Ryan.
Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney.
Yeah, I know.
Weird fact.
Fun fact.
And so it's not quite in October, but it's in mid-September when somebody releases a tape of Romney's comments to donors about the 47%. And we did a really great episode with David Korn on this. I think, did David break the story?
He broke the story, yeah.
Yeah. But you'll probably remember this quote, right? That there are 47% of the people who will vote for Barack Obama no matter what, who are dependent on the government, who believe that they are the victims. My job is not to worry about those people. I will never convince them they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives.
Yeah.
Again, not a great way to win people over by writing them off. And I do think, that election, we thought it was closer than it actually turned out to be. But because that really reinforced the core argument of the Obama campaign versus Romney and Ryan, I feel like that one had a real punch.
Do you remember, I think I said this when we were recording the podcast, that I was voting in Dorchester. At the time I lived in Dorchester. And when I showed up to the poll, a man said, the 47% is here. The 47% is here to vote. And I was like, oh, it's not going to look good for you. Like, Gaff, did you win?
Yeah. Do you have memories of that moment or thoughts on that?
I do. I mean, I remember that. And because it did feel like kind of a landslide from that, from that point onward.
Right.
I remember the election coverage, Karl Rove stumbling around, trying to explain it on TV, and which was delightful just to watch him it's under stress. But yeah, that was a real heavy one. And the thing about it was the viciousness and dismissiveness, right?
Yeah.
Because if he had just been like, look, a bunch of people are going to vote for the Democratic candidate for president in 2012, right? And like, I'm probably not going to chip away at that. That's like not a controversial thing, but it was so like disgusting the way he expressed it. It was just like the people who vote for Democrats, people who have no agency in their own life and refuse to accept it. Like, ooh.
Yeah, and it fit into the whole makers and takers theme that had emerged that year. You know, it was dismissive, but it was not childless cat ladies. I mean, it was conservative. It was a conservative viewpoint.
Yeah.
What made it particularly smarmy, I think, was that it was delivered to a room of ultra-rich donors.
Yeah.
And I think if you remember and David Corn talked about this on the show, but the other stuff that was in that tape too, there was just a disconnect between stuff he was clearly saying in a room to donors and stuff he was saying on that. And I think that, as much as anything, hit people the wrong way.
Yeah.
Of just like, this is how these people talk in private.
A big problem with Republican policy is like when people hear what it is.
Yeah. It's a real hard thing for
This
them.
man on CNN. Trenchant political analysis.
Yeah. When people hear what they mean, people are like, ugh.
But I look. We did an episode on this. I'm really fascinated by this moment. I think about the basket of deplorables comment from Hillary Clinton, which I will die on the hill that that was really taken out of context and spun in just a really because she was doing a sort of similar thing rhetorically to what Romney is doing here, which is saying, look, we live in a country where this group of people is just, we're not going to reach them and this group of people. And then there is this group of people, and Clinton did this very explicitly. Romney doesn't do it as much, but Clinton very explicitly says our job is to reach all those other people who are still have an R next to who they vote for, but they're still Americans and we need to bring them in. And so, there's a little of that going on in this comment from Romney. And moreover, I think when I think back to the 2012 election, I really do feel like it was the last election that was kind of run on a real difference of political viewpoint, and it was actually, and it kind of was nicely summed up by the two sort of twisted rhetorical scandals, which was Obama saying you didn't build that, and Romney saying dismissing the 47%, which if you take half a step back from the kind of scandal of the rhetoric, actually do sort of express a Democratic and Republican viewpoint on the economy. And that's what that election sort of played out to be about.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Do you want to talk about how that tape kind of came out into the world? So it made its way to David Corn, but it was a bartender.
Yeah,
who
it was
recorded
a bartender who's in this room full of fat cats, and he's listening to this, and he's like, "Oh, okay, I might just set my phone up here, make a little recording."
Not a phone though; it was pre-phone, so it was an actual little mini cam.
Yeah. And then holds on to it because he understands what an October surprise is.
Because he said it in May. Romney says this in May.
Yeah. So he's like, let's release this when it matters, and that's how it comes out in September.
There's a real lesson there, I think, which is tip your bartenders.
Actually,
David Corn made a very good point. I went back and listened to that episode today. He made a very good point that the thing that did was obviously it reinforced a narrative that was already out there. So that cuts both ways. The scandals that reinforce an existing narrative are very powerful, but also it's we didn't necessarily need an extra piece of evidence that this is Romney's worldview. But what it did do was it caused the Romney campaign. That was the lead news item for 2 whole weeks. And every hour is precious when you get to October. And that they were putting out that fire for 2 weeks, I think is as much the impact as anything on that. All right, let's move to stuff that the press digs up. So, this was a nice segue because that was a sort of media story. But Kelly, where do you want to start with this?
You gave me all the juicy ones. Really. So, okay, I'm going to take you back to the 19th century, too. We're going to go back to 1844. James K. Polk is running against Henry Clay. These are 2 slaveholders, and they're sort of going tit for tat. And the rumor that gets started about James K. Polk is you might be a slaveholder, but you're not a very good one. You brand your slaves. And that was considered fighting words. Now, again, I feel like I have to say this. There's no such thing as a good slaveholder. there's no such thing as like
Bold
a kind
statement.
master, but again, trying to put that extra rub there. The problem is not that you're a slaveholder. The problem is like how you handle your enslaved property. And this idea that he was branding his enslaved property really stuck with Polk and really sort of becomes this moment in which people are thinking about what kind of person they want to vote for. And it's, again, not about slavery, but like, if he's that violent, if he's that brutal, does he get my vote? They didn't call it the October Spies back then. They called it roarbacking.
Roarbacking.
Yeah.
So the story here is that this abolitionist newspaper publishes this rumor about Polk branding his slaves, and it's reportedly taken from a book called Roarback's Tour Through the Southern and Western States in the Year 1836, so some travelogue. But before the term October Surprise existed, we had roarbacking or roarbacking.
I like October Surprise better.
You like roarbacking.
Rolls off the tongue a little easier.
I know, maybe.
Apparently, roarbacking was the term for a sort of rumor or undermining of a candidate late in. It didn't really stick.
Yeah, no, and that's okay. So we're going to go into the 20th century.
You want to go to the 20th century?
Into the 20th century. And this is George Bush's DUI. So about 24 years earlier, George Bush is about 30 years old. He gets pulled over for drunk driving. He gets a DUI. He's arrested. And it kind of gets swept under the rug. Nobody really talks about this. And in the month of October, all of a sudden, this story comes back into the news. George Bush has a DUI. He was drunk driving in Maine. This sets a bad example. Bush is pissed for a lot of reasons. He suspects that this is, Gore's doing. And interestingly, Gore kind of like, he doesn't really harp on that opportunity.
Yeah.
He probably could have done that, but he sort of like sidesteps it a little bit. But that also stayed in the news for a big while. I mean, people don't think of George Bush as an alcoholic, but he definitely struggles with alcoholism, which is the reason he doesn't, drink now. But it felt like a really shady thing to do right on the cusp of the election, to bring up his past.
There's a couple things there. I mean, one of them is, gosh, remember when a DUI was like a big political scandal?
Yeah, I know. I know.
We had one of those in this election.
Right.
And people were like, he seems nice.
I know. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
You're like
Tim Walz had a DUI in the 1990s.
That did not make it across
His
my
mugshots all over the internet.
Yeah.
Nobody
I missed
cares
that.
at all.
Wow, you guys are in
Truly.
deep.
People were like, he probably didn't mean it.
But also, I looked
Tim
at
had
his,
a beard. It's fine.
his mugshot, and I was like, oh, he's kind of cute.
Okay, this is useless for the podcast listeners, and it's going to sound arrogant after what you just said. The mugshot looks like, people on the internet were like, why does the mugshot look exactly like you, Josh Gondelman? It is like big round face, baseball cap. It was very funny.
But I actually think one of the reasons why the Bush one and the Walz one don't necessarily stick is because both men got sober after.
Yeah.
And there's a
Yeah.
redemption story in there.
It
that
felt
kind
like
of-
a real dig.
yeah.
It's like, hey, listen, this is a person that's trying to be sober. We don't need to punch down. It kind of felt like that. So it doesn't, it has a moment, but it probably didn't have the same sort of punch it would have if we thought of him as someone with a real problem or current problem.
But what if it would have changed 538 votes in Florida?
Well,
Wow.
funny
Yeah.
enough,
Just the Supreme Court. It's only nice.
funny enough, Karl Rove at some point gave an interview and claimed that this rumor probably cost Bush 5 states in the year 2000, which is just absurd. I mean,
No,
come on.
that's,
You think this swung 5 states?
No way. It was an interesting point because it feels like there was like a discussion around it about kind of conservative hypocrisy, which was,
Yeah.
I remember in 2000, a central tenet of what people described as Bush's appeal is he's the kind of guy you could have a beer with. And then when this came out, people were like, no, he doesn't drink beer anymore because of this. And so it
Yeah.
became this like whole confusing narrative of like what people liked about him. He would be nice to drink a beer with versus what he's actually like when he drinks beer, which is gets behind the wheel of a car. And then it kind of canceled each other out.
Oh, man.
I do think Gore's decision to not hammer at this probably plays a big part in it, honestly. And I mean, frankly, in my mind, sort of parallels Gore's decision to not go too hard in the wake of the election. I think it was probably also the last time candidates felt like the high road was maybe the road to victory.
Yeah, for sure.
Al Gore hears about drunk driving, and he's just sickened by our dependence on fossil fuels.
Yes. All right.
That's an inconvenient truth.
Kelly, let's do it.
You had to give me like the
I know.
biggest surprise of all of October, which happens October 7th. It is the Access Hollywood tapes with Billy Bush in conversation with Donald Trump. And, they're talking in the back of looks like an RV, or they're talking in the back of like a press bus. And Trump is pretty much gloating about what he would do with a pretty woman. Every time he sees a pretty woman, he says, you can do anything. When you're a star, they let you. You can do anything. You can grab them by the pussy. You can do anything. And of course, Billy Bush is cracking up when he says this. And it becomes a huge moment. That I have a lot of thoughts about, because this was right before the first debate with Hillary Clinton. The third debate with Hillary Clinton. And so people think that this is going to be Trump's downfall. Like, oh, this is it. This is gonna take him down. Trump himself, of course, brushes it off. He's like, oh, this is locker room talk. This is not to be taken seriously. And then he does something really shady, which is at the debate, he tries to bring the women to the debate that accused Bill Clinton of sexual assault and harassment. And they are not allowed to attend the debate. But the fact that he brought them there and brings them to a press conference, and Hillary Clinton's kind of appalled by all of this. And you would think that women would be like, you know what? He doesn't have my vote. But of course, overwhelmingly, women do vote for Trump. So surprise, but no surprise.
Before I get your thoughts, let's do, I don't know if it was the third debate. Let's do a quick pickup. Do you want to just say this was just before the second debate?
Yes.
I think it was before the second debate.
This is just before the second debate when he says this, the second debate between Hillary Clinton.
Right. Perfect. All right. Thoughts, memories? Sorry to take you back to October 2016.
I don't know if anyone here is old enough to remember October 2016, but
It's been like 2 decades since
I know,
then.
yeah.
So.
I had just long flowing hair, like Bon Jovi in the 80s. But I that was a prevailing feeling in many corners of like, he can't recover from how grotesque this comes off.
Yeah.
And it was like, again, constant coverage. And it was really jarring. It was like, everybody here I was being facetious, is old enough to remember like that feeling of like, oh, this is it. This is as big, I would say as big a scandal that happened, or a hot mic moment that happened in a presidential election in my lifetime. And it happened 1 month before the election. And I didn't change the results.
No.
Well,
no, except for Billy Bush. I mean, Billy Bush loses his job.
yeah, poor Billy Bush.
The real victim in all of
He's
this.
going to be fine.
But
He's
no,
fine.
look, this is, Nikki hinted at it earlier. When an election is really close, you can point to any host of things. I think there is a world in which you can. I mean, I was at 538 at the time. We were looking at the polling very closely, day by day. This did hurt Trump.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to something else later that did hurt Trump. And, Trump lost the popular vote.
Yeah.
So, you can say this like had an effect. Obviously, he wins, but it's you kind of have to hold both thoughts, that it didn't matter and it did.
But it didn't matter to me. I think it didn't matter to the group of people that it should have mattered to the most, which was white women. There is that sort of instant, sort of offensive, pearl clutching moment. But yet when they go to the ballot box, they all overwhelmingly check for Donald Trump. And so I think because of the way it got brushed under the rug, it's kind of like, oh, how boys talk. Oh, the locker room. I mean, it really got trivialized and diminished and reduced in a way that it didn't, after a few weeks, I think, have that same sort of gravitas.
And in many ways, it made the party support for him even stronger, because once they came home, they'd already come home and set aside some of the biggest, most offensive stuff. I remember when this tape dropped, because I was getting on...
Dropped, like it's a...
I know.
I remember when he dropped this
on
one.
DatPiff downloading.
Drop the visuals, Trump.
I was getting on a plane, and this came out. And for the very first time, I bought Wi-Fi on a plane because I was like, what just happened? And also recall that same day, a few hours later, maybe a half hour later, the first WikiLeaks messages dropped.
Yeah.
And I recall those two things happening right back to back, and didn't know at the time how determinative they would be of the election.
Wait, which WikiLeaks messages?
Wasn't there a big WikiLeaks drop?
Oh, another
Yeah.
WikiLeaks drop. Yes. Brexit was somewhere in there too. I mean, there was a lot going on.
There's a lot.
I want to speed up the pace here for time, but one last thing on this Access Hollywood tape was just the sort of behind the scenes. So Trump had, there were all these rumors about The Apprentice and his behavior on The Apprentice that had come out, which caused an NBC reporter who had worked on Access Hollywood, a decade earlier, to sort of remember this moment, dug it up in the archives. Apparently at NBC, they were kind of going through legal, doing the vetting, deciding kind of how to put this out and write around it. And that was taking like a number of days in early October, and someone then just leaked it to the Washington Post. And David Fahrenthold put it up on the Washington Post website, and then NBC freaks out. They put it on, and I think it was the most traffic the Washington Post website had ever gotten. It crashed their servers, and Fahrenthold won a Pulitzer Prize for posting. He did other good reporting too, but he won a Pulitzer Prize. TMZ, though, published a rumor that to your point earlier about kind of sitting on the news, that NBC had actually known about this for months, and they were conspiring to wait until the last moment and make it an October surprise, but NBC has denied that. All right, let's move on to our next category. We'll rip through a few of these because we want to leave time for shady stuff at the end. But this is stuff that happens in the world. So foreign events that sort of upend things and often, I think, shift the tone of an election from domestic matters to foreign affairs. So I'm going to list two here real quick, one in 1956, one in 1964. So in 56, this was an election that was largely around Brown v. Board and was about sort of domestic issues. And then there is a uprising in Hungary. You all remember the uprising in Hungary, and a Suez Canal crisis in 56, and it really does shift the election, and citizens kind of rally around Eisenhower in that moment, and it helps kind of move the election in his direction.
I know about the Suez Canal incident exclusively from the end of that one verse of "We Didn't Start the Fire."
Oh, it's in there?
Where Billy Joel goes, "Trouble in the Suez." Really? Oh, that's what that
There
is.
you go.
Yeah.
We really should mine that song. 1964. There is it's LBJ versus Goldwater, and basically there's like nuclear weapons tests between USSR and China, and everyone's like, oh, right, remember that? And it kind of makes Goldwater's very sort of saber-rattling, inflammatory rhetoric a little less appealing to voters, and LBJ prevails. Funnily enough, that one also crowded out what could have potentially been another October surprise, which is that LBJ's top aide, Walter Jenkins, was arrested for disorderly conduct with another man in the Washington, D.C. YMCA. But lucky for him, they decided to test nuclear weapons.
How do you know that's not a wag the dog kind of thing, where he's like, here's some nuclear weapons.
That's how wild things were in living memory in the United States, that like being gay was the same as international nuclear warfare.
Which one is going to upend?
Yeah. Which one, right? Which one do people
matters
care about
more?
It's an open question.
1992, on October 1st, I wasn't fully aware of this election, but we've done episodes on this, but that Ross Perot re-entered on October 1st. I mean, that is late in the game.
Crazy.
And he got 15% of the vote. He'd been in, he went out, he came back in, he got 15% of the vote.
19%.
19, yeah.
19% of the vote.
That's a lot.
So much.
Yeah.
People forget how much that was.
Yes.
A lot.
Not us, Josh.
Not us. But that's so much, because people go, is Jill Stein going to change things with half of a percent?
RFK's
Yeah.
1%.
Yeah. Ross
I know.
Perot was out here winning 19% of the vote, coming in October like a guy who shows up late to a birthday party. Like, I brought wine. I guess we're still drinking wine.
And political scientists spent like decades arguing, did it affect? It's like 19% of the vote. Like,
It's something.
It's something.
Not nothing.
It's unlikely that the voter, it was like one for me, one for you for Clinton and Bush Sr.
Yeah. 2004, on October 27th, Osama bin Laden released a video claiming responsibility for the 9/11 attacks and calling Bush a dictator who repressed freedom by means of the Patriot Act. So coming out against the Patriot Act. And I don't know, do we have thoughts on this? I mean, I think largely speaking, it kind of reinforced that Bush and bin Laden are locked in some sort of, mortal fight, which probably reinforced Bush's kind of pro-war what he was running on in 2004.
I don't think in 2004 when bin Laden said that American freedoms are being taken away under the Patriot Act, I don't think we were yet nationally in a place to acknowledge that sometimes, rarely, not the big ones, Osama bin Laden had a point.
We're just going to clip that.
We weren't. I know how podcasts work. I just don't think we weren't in 2004. If I'd said that on a stage, someone in a pickup truck would have driven through the window at the front of this venue and put me in the bed and then just driven away. You'd never see me again. It would be me and the Dixie Chicks just gone for 20 years. Sorry, I talked right over you. That was so rude.
The chicks found out, so that's all.
Okay, sorry, the Chicks. I didn't mean to dead name the Chicks.
Seamless transition to 2008 economic collapse. Here's another October surprise. So this has been obviously brewing for much of 2007 into 2008. But, if we remember those heady days of the fall 2008, joblessness reaches a 14-year high. The global economy is on the brink of disaster. We're starting to feel the effects of the Great Recession in the middle of the McCain versus Obama race. Do you have thoughts on or memories on how that?
I do remember that. And I remember McCain suspending his campaign for a little bit because he's like, I'm going to go work on this problem. And then he didn't really work on the problem, which was wild to me. I mean, and then does he pull out of the debate? I feel like.
Well, he says he's going to. So to me, this is the big actual impact here is McCain just showed real unsteadiness in that moment. So he says he's going to suspend his campaign. I remember standing in the newsroom at WMIC and seeing that and being like, that was a mistake. Like, this guy's cooked. Yeah. But then he says he's going to suspend it to go work on the TARP, which was the first one?
Yeah, the bailout.
And then then it comes out that he's not actually part of the small group that's negotiating that. So he's just like milling around in the Senate, waiting to vote. And then he says he's not going to do the debate, which was scheduled for 4 days later. But then he actually does do the debate. And it was just that unsteady.
It's not very presidential.
No.
Well, and Obama at the time was just like, we can chew gum and walk at the same time. And in fact, that's the job.
Yeah.
So it was a real moment for Obama. I remember that because I grew up in Indiana, and that the devastation that happened economically happened so fast and was so unsettling and unmooring that the state of Indiana voted for Barack Obama. Yeah. And it was because of the financial crisis and how devastating it was, particularly in the northern part of the state.
I forgot about that. Yeah, I need to look at looking at old electoral maps. Like, you're like, wait,
old, like 10 years ago.
I know, but still, you're like,
Carolina.
Indiana, North
Carolina.
Carolina.
Talking about earlier tonight about how California was a swing state.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Whoa, that's like, and it's also, I wonder how many electoral votes it had back then.
A lot less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We hadn't got there.
All right. Well, Trump said Trump got COVID on October 2nd, 2020. We don't have to get too far into that, but it was maybe Twitter's greatest night.
Yeah,
I'll say that.
It ruled.
20,
it was so funny.
But I want to do one more. I want to do one more kind of out of nowhere, really worth digging into, and then Josh will take us to the rat fucking.
How many times have you heard that one?
You made that sound like that's like a bar I know. He's from here. He'll take us to the rat fucking. It's where TT and the Bears used to be.
2016, the Comey letter. This is, I'll talk through the various narratives here, but there is a narrative that this is maybe the October surprise that really did have a big effect on the letters, have a big effect on an election. So on October 28th, then FBI Director James Comey announces in a letter to Congress that he would take, quote, appropriate investigative steps to review additional emails related to Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. This was announced because they had discovered new emails on a seized laptop belonging to
Anthony Weiner.
Anthony Weiner. Remember this? Anthony
This
Weiner's laptop.
fucking guy.
This fucking guy.
No, I know.
So Anthony Weiner's laptop makes its way to the FBI. They find some new emails there. It sort of dredges back up this email scandal, non-scandal, but it gives the imprimatur of an FBI investigation on October 28th. Did this affect the election? So I'm going to sort of lay out the case in both directions. So the case 4 is kind of what I think very quickly after the election was the prevailing wisdom. So if you look at like the FiveThirtyEight polling averages for that, for those weeks, Clinton had a nearly 6-point lead heading into right before the Comey letter is released, and a 3-point lead 1 week later. So it's just a 3-point shift in a very close election, basically hinging right around that letter. The case against, which I think has emerged more recently, is that a lot of polls go into an average like that, and there's a delay between when you conduct a poll, you run the numbers, and then you announce it. And a number of those most impactful polls were taken like the night before the letter was released or came out, but then released like 3 days later, and they get thrown into the pot with the average and are kind of smoothed out and tell this story of the Comey letter being this hinge moment. The other thing, if you'll remember in there, is that was where the third debate was right in those days. And to me, and I remember thinking at the time, the third debate was a real hinge moment in that it really did good things for Clinton, but it happened just far enough from Election Day that her support was starting to erode in the wake of that. And that was right where the Comey letter. So, there's the eroding support from the third debate. There's the Comey letter, there's this sort of poll lag, and then Election Day happens. So, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people don't like James Comey for writing this letter. A lot of people like to pin it on him. I don't know if any of you have thoughts.
Don't like James Comey.
Okay.
It feels like a weird choice.
Yeah.
Like, what a strange... First of all, there's so many of these that are about letters being written, which feels quaint and old-timey. But yeah, I don't know. I think, again, a thing that I don't like about politics is that sometimes the appearance of propriety, which is what Comey was very concerned with, takes precedence over substance, which is there are emails on a laptop, right? That's what he was saying, is like, we'll see what was on those emails. So it's very weird to me because it felt so seismic, but it was just, hey, we got a laptop with emails. We're looking for this guy's dick. But maybe there's some other emails too.
Yeah.
All right. We are running a little long, so we'll go to let's coordinate here. Josh, why don't we do the immigration letter, and then we'll do Vietnam and Iran hostages. Okay.
Great.
And
sure.
and like, yeah. So okay, here we go. We'll pick this up. All right, our final category, shady stuff, as if what we've heard over the course of the last 45 minutes isn't shady enough. We have some stuff that very squarely falls into the shady category, and Josh is going to lead us through some of these.
Great. So we're going back to the 19th century once more, 1880, a fake pro-immigration letter. On October 20th, 1880, the New York Truth, which is not a publication that only exists on Facebook, published a 3-sentence letter, which, to the point, purportedly written by Republican nominee James A. Garfield. The note was addressed to H.L. Morey of Lynn, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
That's right. And it voiced support for Chinese immigration to the U.S. and expressed the opinion that employers had the right, quote, to buy labor where they can get it the cheapest. So the Democratic and Republican platforms had, as well as Garfield himself, had endorsed restrictions on Chinese immigration. So this letter kind of destabilized the conversation and turned it into a contest of who can be more racist. So Garfield at first didn't know whether he'd written the letter or not.
That's the best part of all of
That's
it.
the best part. Because there was a moment where he was like, sounds like me.
Could have done it.
Could have been.
So that this letter gets spread all over the place. It's really talked up. And then by the time Garfield sees the letter and goes, I didn't write that. It's too late, and people have all heard it. Garfield beat his opponent, Winfred Scott Hancock, of course, by only 0.02 percentage points in the popular vote, and he lost California, the state most affected by Chinese immigration. Then after the election, the letter's author was revealed to be Kenward Phillip, a New York Truth journalist who was later arrested and indicted for fraud. Fucking obviously.
A reporter for the New York Truth.
New York Truth.
Writes a fake-ass letter.
That really feels like the New York press version of Jonah Ryan's website
Yes.
on feed. Ryanthology.
Remarkable. All right,
It's wild.
back to Vietnam,
Back to Vietnam.
1968.
LBJ had previously announced a halt to bombing and the start of peace talks, propelling Humphrey above Nixon in the polls because people wanted peace. Nixon responded by reaching out to South Vietnam's president through back channels, encouraging him not to attend peace talks and assuring him that if Nixon was elected, South Vietnam could expect stronger support from his administration than it would get from Johnson or Humphrey. So Nixon saying, you don't want peace. You want me to come in and do better war. And then 3 days before the election, the South Vietnamese withdrew from the peace talks and Humphrey lost the momentum. By that point, LBJ had learned that Nixon was interfering in international affairs and had begun wiretapping the Nixon campaign, justifying some of Nixon's paranoia. And then Humphrey chose not to make Nixon's actions public, however, and lost to his Republican opponent on election day. So this is one of those October non-surprises.
Yeah.
But is this the shadiest thing we've encountered so far? Scuttling peace talks?
This is the worst.
Yeah.
This is terrible. He scuttles the peace talks in Vietnam. Johnson can't say anything because he wasn't supposed to be wiretapping his plane. So you've got like layers of problems here. But yeah, a lot of people die after 68.
Yeah.
And that's on Nixon.
Yeah, it is. The idea that you could have gotten peace sooner and you advocated against it for your own personal gain is abhorrent.
Well, let's see if we can top that.
I just want to go back to what I said earlier, and you can take this in any context you want. You gotta trust Kissinger. 1980. Days before U.S. voters cast their ballots, Iran announced that it would not release hostages until after the election. They would be released eventually minutes after Reagan completed his inaugural address in 1981. And this is also kind of what Trump has claimed he could do, right, for detained journalists, who have since been released. But he was saying, I'm the only guy. I'm going to get this deal done, and they'll do it once I'm elected. 2 congressional investigations found no evidence of a conspiracy between Reagan and Iran. Trump, you don't have to find a conspiracy. He literally says it on TV. However, many people have since confirmed there were nefarious backroom discussions going on. Reagan chairman William J. Casey was alleged to have met with representatives of Iran in July and August 1980 in Madrid, which just seems nice that time of year, leading to a deal supposedly finalized in Paris, beautiful, in October, in which a future Reagan administration would ship arms to Tehran through Israel in exchange for hostages being held until after the election. And there are absolutely no present-day resonances of that sentence.
Yeah, I think this is the October surprise of, this is the story where I first kind of came to understand this idea of an October surprise as a shady thing. And it's funny that it brings us full circle because it was the thing that they were proclaiming and trying to prevent by getting it out there. And then they realized, hey, wait a minute, maybe meddling with the hostages could do us some good.
It's been said already, but it's so despicable when like people's lives are treated as pawns in that way. And it's like such a normal thing, and it like kind of drives me up a wall to be like, but don't do that.
Yeah.
That's people.
Do good things and not bad things.
Do good things and bad things. It's such a good point.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. I'm like, don't do the good thing.
So simple.
You're absolutely right.
All right. So to wrap up, I want to come back to some of those central questions. One is, I'm curious, Kellie, like, do you feel like, having gone through this, how much of it matter is it about the fact that it's just simply happening towards the end, and that it is it's happening when voters are most at attention, when media is most at attention, and it's like the last thing we remember before we vote. And so when we write the story of an election, we happen to point at it, or are some of these legit big left turn stories?
I think both, right? I mean, I think for bad news always sticks more than good news does. And I think if you are on the fence, and this is what I think maybe I struggle with because our society is so polarized now. We're like, who is on the fence? Like, really? But when we think about if you are on the fence and you get this bad news, will it sway or will it influence when you go into this ballot box? And I think some of that is a little legit. I don't know how much weight we can put on that, though. And how much it matters, if this happened in the summer, do people still remember when you get to the ballot box? But yeah, timing is everything.
I mean, all of these seem to reinforce an existing theme, which I think is one of the sort of fundamental things to understand about a scandal, is it sticks when it pushes in a direction that things are already kind of pushing.
Yeah.
And so in
Momentum.
that regard, it's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think also additionally, because that's such a smart point, Kelly, and I think additionally we're talking about an election with 76% turnout. Now we're down to 40. So in addition to swaying people one way or the other when they're in the ballot box, I think some of these might have made people go, why would I go to the ballot box?
Exactly.
I don't
That's
care
the
about
point
this.
too, yeah. The apathy. Yeah.
Yeah. And sorry. No,
And I kind of wonder if we're at the end of the October surprise now that politics have become more, everybody's got their team, but also now that it's, what would have to happen to shock you in October?
Talk about things we're going to clip and play later.
Sorry, I should be knocking on wood, but I think we've hit everything already this election cycle.
Okay.
I'm making it worse.
Y'all are great.
Jesus, what are you doing?
I know.
I kind of have an opposite diagnosis, which is that maybe we should make everything October surprise. To me, one of the things that I'm thinking about in the wake of this is, and I've been thinking about it because of the way this election has played out, is maybe our elections should be a lot shorter. And maybe we should all...
That's true.
Maybe it should just all be October.
Yes.
And then every surprise is an October surprise.
An advent calendar.
Yeah.
Yes.
But really, I mean, it is one of my wishes when we kind of tell the story of this election is that maybe because of the way it played out with Biden dropping out and Harris coming in and the sort of crest of enthusiasm and the realization that we didn't need to have been living with these people for the last 8 months in an election. We can just start it now. Maybe this country will change that. And I think elections should be short. A lot of other countries do it the same way. And I think this proves that, the stuff we remember, the stuff that matters is in that last window anyway. So I don't know. Maybe it should all be an October surprise. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. Josh Gondelman, thank you so much for doing this. This was really great.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is such a pleasure to get to be dumb with all you brilliant people. You were so smart and I was so silly.
Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
And then as the music is playing, I'll do a little more in the outro here, but I'll just say thank you also to a lot of the people who helped make this show who are in the room tonight. So Jacob and Brittany and Audrey and Yuri and Carrie and Gretchen and Gina and Maggie, all the other Radiotopia folks who are here, Stephen, Avi, and everyone else at WBUR CitySpace, thank you for helping us put on this show. And of course, thanks to all of you who came out to join us. Give yourself a round of applause. All right. So that's the end of that taping. Thank you. I hope that was... So we'll probably split that into 2 episodes, I think, and I'll do a little intro, outro.
Start the second one right when I say Osama bin Laden at a point.
We'll just loop that over the intro. So look, I as sometimes happens when you tape, we're running a little long, but do people want to hang and do a little Q&A for a few minutes, and then we'll go out there and eat some sweets and so forth. But Josh, you're off the hook. Thank you, Josh.
Bye, Josh.
So as you raise your hand, and if you have questions, and those questions can be about what we just discussed, they can be about this election, they can be about the brilliant work that these two do. But as we do that, I do want to ask Jacob and Brittany to ask Jacob and Brittany to stand up. That's Jacob Feldman and Brittany Brown. They help make the show. We're gonna go right to audience questions, but they're gonna be out there. Go up to them. I mean, they have their hand in every single one of these episodes. The preps are incredible. Brittany's editing is incredible, and we've all been on this kind of journey of learning about weird election stuff and political stuff together for the last 4 years. So it's really nice to be here with them and all of you. So, any questions? Let's go right there.
Oh, right there.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm wondering if the advent of early voting and mail-in voting has pushed the October surprise earlier to September, because now a lot of people are voting in October, and suddenly Election Day doesn't have as much weight.
This is so interesting because you actually hear this argument for those people who advocate against early voting, where they're like, no, voters aren't going to have enough information because something could happen in October that changes their minds. I don't think that's a very good argument, but it comes up a lot in that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I mean, I love early voting. I think it's great. I mean, I'm also like, let's get this show on the road. You know what I mean? I also feel like that too. But I mean, as I said earlier, I feel like a lot of people have really made up their minds, and short of like some sort of catastrophe, I think people will still kind of be like, so he's got my vote, so I don't know that people are going to necessarily change.
Yeah, but the idea that it's sort of, I mean, for every individual voter, there's always going to be like a crazy thing that happens a week before they've cast their ballot, whether that's an early vote or in October. So yeah, I don't know. Good point. We're back there. We're just following the mics here. So
yes, I'm tired of polling. I think there's too much polling being done. Is there any way to take control over that? It just seems like now it's almost every day, and it's so close. It doesn't mean anything because, I mean, do the candidates need it? Does the public need to hear about it every day?
So I'm teaching this class at Vanderbilt right now on U.S. elections, and we had as our guest Ariel Edwards-Levy, who does the polling at CNN. So we've just had this very long conversation about polling. The most important comment that comes from that is that polls are snapshots and not predictions. But the big problem is none of us look at polls as snapshots. We all turn to polls because we want to know what's going to happen. And I think that as long as pollsters feel like polls can drive narratives, they're going to be there. But also as long as people are like, elections are so high stakes, I want to know what's going to happen. And polls become kind of the security blanket that you cling to, even though it's not usable information for what's going to happen. So I think that it's going to continue, and I think that it's a problem.
Yeah.
yeah, look, I did my time in the heart of the polling industrial complex at 38, and look, I came to an understanding, and I generally defend the work of a place like 538. I completely agree that the sort of narratives that explode out of polling are, the obsession over it is absurd. I came to believe that polling is the best way to start an inquiry about what's happening in an election. And it is a relatively rigorous way to kind of organize your thinking, but it is the start of the way that you should try and understand an election, not the be-all and not a prediction. But, and I've talked with Nate Silver about this, and, one of the, Nate talks about this, and I believe it, but it's like before polling and reporting about polling and the kind of last 15 years of polling obsession we've lived in, reporters, when they wanted to know what was happening in elections, would write about lawn signs. They would just think about the other ways that you can try and organize your thinking about what's happening in an election. They would go out there, they'd go to one rally and pick up the vibe, talk to 3 people, and then write a front page New York Times article about it. Or they talk about the lawn signs in Ohio or whatever. I will take something a little more rigorous than that any day. Polling is becoming a lot harder to do right now with cell phones, and so yes, I agree there are lots of problems. But when you compare it to the other ways that political journalism can begin to try and organize the state of and understand the state of a race, I kind of think it's still might be the best place to start, or a combination using it as one of the sort of tools of inquiry alongside a lot of other things. Yeah, over here.
Hello, everyone. This is a question for Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson. Could you please tell us about your brand new book and just give us a little introduction
Look
to
at
it?
that.
She's a plant.
The plant. The plant.
She's a plant.
We're so excited to hear about
Thank
it.
you. I see my Wellesley squad over there. Yeah, shameless, maybe not so shameless plug. I have a new book out. It's called We Refuse, A Forceful History of Black Resistance. It's been out for a few months now. I also did the audiobook too. And it's about basically how Black people have fought back against white supremacy. And it looks at all the ways and through a long period of history that Black people have resisted. And I wrote it because I was angry and frustrated and I didn't like the binary of like violence or nonviolence. And so the book has this much more expansive way of thinking about like how can we fight back in ways that are actually effective and not just symbolic. And so yeah, I'm really proud of it. Go out and buy it, guys.
Let's do a couple more.
I think we're ready for cookies.
Yeah, we're ready for
One more,
cookies.
one
Yeah,
more,
let's
and
do
then
one more.
we're ready
Yeah,
for cookies.
right here.
Hi.
Hi.
When he was talking about the fake immigration letter,
Yes.
my mind goes, I imagine, modern, like what is now fake and just thinking about like AI's potential influence. Obviously, there's been recent with bots and Russia's influence on the election and but now the way it's pretty easy to manufacture a deep fake or something.
Yeah.
And it's actually pretty easy to deny that happened and accusing it of being AI. And I'm just curious of your thoughts where you see this playing a role, or just are people pretty savvy and this won't have much of an impact on an election?
I mean, man, I was just talking about this early. AI is so troubling because, I don't know, did you guys hear how like Trump said that Taylor Swift endorsed him and then like had this whole thing, and then Taylor Swift was like, actually, I didn't endorse you. I'm voting for Kamala. Like, it's really hard to tell like what is legit and what is not. And I don't think we have enough systems in place that we trust to consistently give us the truth. And so there's always a tinge of suspicion with whatever it is that we're getting. And I think that's a really problematic way to do the news, especially politics in particular. And actually, I don't know that I have a good solution for it. I mean, Facebook tries to do this thing where they're like, this is not true, or that's true, or whatever. But people are even suspicious of that. So it's hard to get consensus.
Yeah, and I've become very convinced that fact-checking is not an effective way of pushing back against this, because I think one of the things we've learned is that people often choose to believe things or choose to share things and say they're true, even if they know they're not true, because it's useful to them, or because it makes them feel good, or because even though they know it's not true, it feels true, and so it's not enough to debunk something, because I don't think that changes very many minds.
Yeah, which I see despair in that, but I also see a little hope in that, in that it's not just about playing whack-a-mole with all the various types of, misinformation out there, but it's more kind of like, how do we change the larger, much further upstream political environment in which people aren't kind of motivated to believe fake stuff? I mean, we hear about the Taylor Swift thing mostly in the context of like, that was ridiculous, no one believed it, other than people who kind of wanted to believe it to begin with, and those people like don't need that extra thing. They've already made up their minds. So I don't know. Yeah, I think the problem is just much more about fundamental kind of media literacy and sort of political motivations. And I hope the fever will break on that sometime soon.
Yeah.
All right. That is the end of tonight's programming. It is Nikki's birthday. Happy birthday, Nikki.
Yay!
And then out there, we're going to hang out. You can buy merch, including Josh's book. And we have a QR code to get all of our merch. And there's Kellie's incredible book cover, the best academic book cover of all time.
1,000%.
And we have some sweets and stuff to celebrate out there. So we will see you out there in a few minutes. But thank you all for coming so much.